Imagine if we could be flies on the wall for this exchange. King Charles and President Paul Kagame of Rwanda sat across from each other, and the atmosphere in the room was so tense it could take them. Commonwealth butter knife. Commonwealth heads of state are meeting in Samoa for Chogu 2024, but while the main agenda includes climate change and development, the king and the Rwandan leader seem to have their own talking points. Hello, viewers. Welcome to Royal Revelations. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the notifications bell so you will get any news about the British royal family. List in a typically careful manner. The king has just finished a speech. Charles has spoken about acknowledging history and finding ways to describe inequalities without directly using rather urgent language. Now, we mention reparations in this history. The king seems to be feeling the burden of Britain's colonial past a little more than usual, but as always, he is steered carefully, publicly conveying his sorrow, expressing the brutality of the slave trade, but not daring to apologize yet, let alone discuss monetary reparations. Then comes President Kagame, but as it turns out, he is not in the mood to say things in vague sympathy or careful terms. The regret is delivered with a smile and a frank tone. Cog leans forward to meet Your Majesty, while we are busy acknowledging that many of our citizens are still living with the very real consequences of this painful past. It is good to talk, but not to talk. We've seen enough of that. The tension is unmistakable by now. Charles leans back a little, seems thoughtful, maybe even a little defensive, but he's used to politicians speaking diplomatically, even if it's a little indirect. The Rwandan president doesn't stop there. So, he starts listing off estimates of the staggering amount of reparations that Britain would be owed. Some estimates put it at £1 trillion. The Commonwealth says that this should just be a forum for discussion and goodwill, but a forum for holding the real accountable. King Charles listens. President Cog replies that he agrees that action is needed, but that the complex relationships cannot be ignored, and that while none of us here today have the power to change history, we can work towards a future where justice is not just economic, not just reparations, but sustainable development for all, and I believe that's what we collectively should be focused on. While it is clear that Childs intends to stick to the script and keep the focus on unity and development, the strategist is not prepared to leave the issue alone. He responds, "Yes, Your Majesty, sustainable development is vital, but developing without redressing historical imbalances is like putting a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling wall. It looks good at the moment, but it doesn't get to the root of the problem." King Charles is clearly upset and will try from a different angle. He pointed to the UK's support for tackling climate change within the Commonwealth. Finally, climate change is one of the key agendas this year, especially for small island nations such as the host nation of the event, Samoa. He points to the room and talks about shared responsibility and the need for unity to address these modern threats, but President Chogu has his own thoughts on this as well. "Your Majesty, it's commendable that the UK is supporting these efforts," he says, "but climate change is not just a modern threat, it's another challenge that disproportionately affects people who have been historically marginalized. If we are serious about making the Commonwealth a place of real opportunity, perhaps wealthier countries should consider funding these climate change measures without burying vulnerable countries under further debt." As King Charles processes Kay's words, he recalls the pressures and expectations that have weighed on him for so many years. The British monarchy has tried to distance itself from the country's colonial past while still trying to maintain loyalty to the Commonwealth, but this is a jokey act and Charles is not used to it either, and yet, King Charles' demands for reparations and money are a clear indication of his objective approach, which always seems to cover this diplomatic cover. The conversation cuts through what surrounds it. For the leaders gathered here, it's not just about reparations or an apology for, but what it represents in a world where the of the past still impacts the present. The Cog's position is clear. It's not about paying back a penny, but rather recognizing that real reparations pave the way for a balanced future. The room felt a little warmer after the exchange, and the discussion certainly shifted into a different gear. Of course, no final conclusion has been drawn. If the occasional sparks point to a different future, then Chogu is a place of words after all. As far as Charles and Cog are concerned, this back and forth may end up being meaningful. The Federation is always promising, but we rarely see any, so it's hard to say who'll get the conversation exchange one, but one thing is for sure. Chung 2024 won't just be remembered for its climate change issue, This debate between King Charles and President Kagame, some would call it a clash of perspectives, some would call it a meeting of the minds, will be called a historic moment when the Federation felt the shock of the responsibilities it holds. Chung is preaching, and perhaps as he leaves Samoa, he will return with a little more understanding of what it actually means to come to terms with the past.